New for this morning, a federal judge blocks a rule from the Biden administration that would have allowed agricultural workers on visas to unionize.
Kansas Attorney General Kobach led the multi-state effort. He filed a lawsuit accusing the Department of Labor of exceeding its authority to grant foreign workers rights that U.S. workers don't have. As of now, American ag workers do not have the right to unionize. The judge issued a preliminary injunction saying only the states that the plaintiffs would likely win their suit, because the department can't create new worker protections without congressional approval. The injunction was only granted in the states involved in that lawsuit.